I, 35 men, have worked at my company for almost 10 years, but recently a new intern appeared who turned out to be not who he claims to be. So here's the deal. I, 35 men, have worked at my company for nearly a decade. It's been a grind, long hours, weekend sacrificed, all that stuff, but it paid off. I'm now a senior manager, trusted by my bosses and respected by my team, or at least I was. A few months ago, the company brought in a new intern, Emma, 22F. She's fresh out of college, eager, sharp, like really sharp. At first, I thought she was just one of those overachievers who soak up everything like a sponge. But the more I worked with her, the more something felt off. Emma had this uncanny way of knowing things. Details about our projects, company history, even stuff that wasn't public knowledge. One day, she casually mentioned a project I'd worked on 5 years ago, something buried so deep in the archives that I had almost forgotten about it myself. I laughed it off as coincidence, but my gut told me otherwise. The weirdness didn't stop there. Emma started asking very specific questions about my role, my responsibilities, and even how I made decisions on high-stakes projects. I chalked it up to curiosity, but something about the way she worded things made me uneasy. It wasn't just curiosity, it felt like she was studying me. At the time, I didn't think too much of it. She was new, eager, and maybe trying to impress the higher-ups. But looking back, those little moments were the first cracks in the facade. I just didn't know it yet. A couple of weeks later, my boss called me into his office to discuss some issues. He mentioned irregularities in the performance reports from my team, which was the first I'd heard of any problems. As he passed a folder to me, I flipped through it and immediately felt my stomach drop. The numbers were completely off. Some metrics were significantly inflated, others severely underreported. It was far too deliberate to be a simple mistake. He tasked me with figuring out what was going on and hinted that the board was already asking questions. That was a wake-up call. Back at my desk, I dove into the problem. I combed through access logs, cross-referenced team submissions, and reviewed the reports line by line. The more I analyzed, the clearer it became that someone had altered the data intentionally. It wasn't an accident. The thought of Emma kept creeping into my mind. She had been overly curious about our processes, especially those involving reporting. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia. Why would an intern, of all people, interfere with something as crucial as performance reports? It didn't make sense. Still, the suspicion lingered, so I decided to watch her more closely. Then came a moment that caught me completely off guard. Emma casually mentioned details about how the board reviewed reports, something an intern shouldn't know. That was when I realized this wasn't just about irregularities in the data. Something much bigger was at play. The next few days were a blur of investigating and overthinking. I kept replaying Emma's strange behavior in my head, her unusual confidence, her pointed questions, and now her apparent knowledge of things she had no reason to know. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was involved, but I needed evidence. Late one evening, while everyone else had gone home, I decided to check the access logs for our internal systems. I had avoided this step earlier because it felt a little extreme, but now it seemed like the only way to get answers. As I scrolled them through the records, my heart started racing. Emma's name appeared far more than it should have for an intern. And then I saw it. Repeated logins under my credentials. She'd been accessing restricted files using my account. The anger hit me like a freight train. She had been snooping around, using my name to cover her tracks. The worst part was that it made me look incompetent. Or worse, complicit. The next morning I confronted her. I kept it professional but firm, laying out everything I'd found. I expected her to deny it, to scramble for excuses. Instead, she stayed calm. Too calm. Emma revealed everything with an unsettling composure. She wasn't just an intern. She had been hired by the company's board as a private investigator, tasked with assessing my performance. The board had apparently been questioning my decisions on high-profile projects and wanted someone on the inside to gather evidence. She dropped another bombshell. The irregularities in the reports weren't just her doing. Members of my own team had been cutting corners and funneling incomplete work under my name. The board already had enough to hold me accountable. I was reeling, trying to process it all. Emma wasn't apologetic. In fact, she said she could help me clear my name, but only if I agreed to leave quietly and take the fall for a minor issue instead. It wasn't just my career on the line anymore, it was my entire reputation. After Emma's shocking confession, I couldn't focus on anything else. The board, the same people I had worked tirelessly to impress, had orchestrated this behind my back. They hadn't even confronted me about their concerns directly. Instead, they had hired an undercover investigator to dig into my work like I was some criminal. Emma's claim about my team cutting corners added another layer of betrayal. I'd always trusted my team, believing we had each other's backs. Now I had to wonder how long they'd been passing off incomplete work and letting me take the fall. I knew I needed more than just Emma's word before deciding my next move. That night I stayed late again and combed through old performance records, cross-referencing them with the projects Emma had flagged. Sure enough, the discrepancies were there, hidden in plain sight. I found emails where team members had subtly shifted responsibility for unfinished tasks to me without outright admitting it. The weight of it all started to sink in. This wasn't just an attack on my job. It was an attack on everything I had built over the last decade. My loyalty, my work ethic, my reputation, it was all on the line. Emma's ultimatum echoed in my mind. Leave quietly, take the fall for something minor, and save myself the humiliations of a full-blown investigation. It felt like a trap, but I couldn't deny the risks of fighting back. If the board already believed I was at fault, how could I possibly prove my innocence? Every instinct told me to fight, but I needed a plan. I wasn't going to let years of dedication crumble without putting up a battle. The following day, I decided to approach one person I thought I could trust. Karen, a senior analyst who had been at the company almost as long as I had. Karen was sharp, meticulous, and had always seemed to have my back. If anyone could help me untangle this mess, it was her. Over coffee in the break room, I casually brought up the irregularities Mike had mentioned, framing it as a minor issue I was investigating. Karen's expression shifted immediately. She seemed hesitant, but admitted she had noticed some unusual patterns in the reports over the past few months. She confided that a few junior employees had been cutting corners to meet deadlines and subtly passing the responsibility to others. While she didn't name names, Karen suggested I check specific team submissions for further evidence. Her insight felt like a lifeline. That night, I dug even deeper into the files. Following Karen's advice, I pinpointed 2 employees whose work frequently showed discrepancies. Cross-referencing with my emails, it became clear they were deliberately shifting blame to me whenever projects fell short. While the pieces were coming together, the weight of Emma's threat still loomed large. The board had already decided I was guilty, and Karen's findings weren't enough to clear my name entirely. I needed undeniable proof, not just of my innocence, but of Emma's true role in the team's sabotage. Before leaving the office, I accessed the internal logs one last time. This time, I pulled records of Emma's activity in the system. What I found nearly knocked the wind out of me. Not only had she been accessing my accounts, but she had also been downloading confidential files and flagging specific emails to the board. She was compiling a case against me, piece by piece. It was the final confirmation I needed. Emma wasn't just observing, she was setting me up. The next step was clear. I had to expose the truth, but doing so without tipping my hand would require precise timing and strategy. This wasn't just about saving my job anymore, it was about reclaiming my integrity. Armed with everything I had uncovered, I knew I needed to act carefully. The board already believed Emma's narrative, and confronting her directly could backfire without hard evidence to back me up. If I wanted to prove my innocence, I needed her to expose herself. I spent the next few days quietly gathering more data. Every email she flagged, every file she accessed, and every suspicious login under my credentials was documented. I also started copying key emails and reports to a private folder. If this blew up, I'd need a secure record of everything. Then I set my plan into motion. Using the system logs, I identified a few files Emma had accessed that were completely irrelevant to her supposed internship. I edited one of them, a dummy document I created, and inserted fake details that would seem incriminating if taken out of context. Next, I casually mentioned during a team meeting that I'd be conducting an audit of all current and past reports. I made sure Emma overheard me. The trap was simple. If she accessed the dummy document and reported it to the board, it would prove she was actively digging for dirt, not just observing. Sure enough, the next morning I checked the access logs. Emma had viewed the file and downloaded it late at night. My dummy document had done its job. Now it was time to escalate. I reached out to IT, framing my request as a concern about unauthorized access to sensitive documents. The IT manager agreed to audit all recent system activity, focusing on unusual logins and downloads. Within a day, IT flagged Emma's activity as suspicious and escalated the matter to Mike. I didn't say anything about my own findings. I wanted to see how the board and Emma would react under pressure. When Mike called me into his office that afternoon, he seemed visibly unsettled. He mentioned the IT report and asked if I had any concerns about recent events. I played it cool, saying I'd been investigating some discrepancies but hadn't drawn any conclusions yet. I left the meeting knowing the board would soon be aware of Emma's actions. What they didn't know was that I had a final card to play, one that would leave no doubt about who was behind the chaos. It was time to confront Emma, but this time I would do it on my terms. With the IT team's findings already raising questions about Emma's activity, I decided the moment was right to force her hand. This time the confrontation wouldn't be in private. I needed witnesses, preferably those with influence. The next morning I requested a meeting with Mike, Emma, and the head of HR, framing it as an opportunity to clarify discrepancies in recent reports. I knew Emma would have no choice but to show up. As we gathered in the conference room, I could feel the tension in the air. Emma entered with her usual calm demeanor, but I could tell she wasn't expecting this. Once everyone was seated, I began by addressing the irregularities in the reports and mentioned the audit IT had conducted. Without accusing her outright, I highlighted the suspicious activity under my account and the unauthorized access to sensitive files. Mike and HR looked concerned, and Emma finally broke her silence, defending herself by saying she was following instructions as part of her internship responsibilities. That's when I dropped the first bombshell. I revealed the dummy document and explained how it had been intentionally flagged to see if anyone would misuse it. I explained that the document had no relevance to any current projects yet had been downloaded and reported by Emma. Her composure started to crack. She claimed she had been following directives from the board to monitor me, which confirmed what I had suspected all along, but I wasn't done yet. Next, I produced copies of emails showing how some team members had shifted blame for incomplete work onto me. I tied this directly to the irregularities in the reports that had first raised red flags. It was becoming clear to everyone in the room that I had been set up, and Emma's involvement wasn't looking like impartial observation anymore. HR stepped in, asking Emma directly if she had been accessing files outside her scope of work. Her response was evasive, but the evidence was damning. Mike, visibly frustrated, asked her to leave the room while HR and I continued the discussion. As Emma walked out, she glared at me, a mix of anger and fear in her eyes. She knew the walls were closing in, and for the first time I felt like I was regaining control of the narrative. After she left, I laid out everything, the logs, the team's misconduct, and Emma's actions. Mike seemed shaken, but he thanked me for bringing the evidence forward. HR promised to escalate the findings to the board immediately. It wasn't over yet, but I'd finally managed to shift the spotlight off me and onto the real problem. Now, I just had to see how the board would react. A few tense days followed the confrontation. The fallout from the meeting spread quickly, and whispers filled the office about Emma's sudden absence. I didn't know exactly what the board was discussing, but I was sure my evidence had made an impact. When Mike called me into his office later that week, his expression was unreadable. He told me the board had conducted an emergency review of Emma's actions and the discrepancies in my team's performance reports. After thorough investigation, they confirmed what I had suspected. Emma had overstepped her role as a private investigator. Instead of simply monitoring, she had manipulated data and targeted me, exceeding the scope of her assignment. It got worse for Emma. The board discovered she had accessed files completely unrelated to her investigation, including confidential company data. This constituted a serious breach of company policy, and she was terminated immediately. But there was still the issue of my team's misconduct. Mike admitted that 2 employees had been intentionally falsifying their work and using my name to cover their mistakes. Both were placed on probation, and one of them was reassigned to a lower stakes role. Then came the part I had been dreading, the board's review of my own performance. Despite the vindication, there were still concerns about why I hadn't caught the irregularities earlier. Mike explained that while the board understood I had been targeted, they wanted assurance that I could prevent something like this from happening again. I was handed a performance improvement plan. Not ideal, but better than the alternative. Mike assured me the board now understood the full context and appreciated the loyalty and effort I had put into the company. As I left his office, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. Emma was gone, the truth was out, and my name had been cleared. But the damage wasn't completely undone. My team still needed rebuilding, and the board's faith in me was shaken. Still, I wasn't going to let this setback define me. If I could survive Emma's sabotage, I could survive anything. What mattered now was reclaiming control of my career and proving to everyone, including myself, that I was still the leader they had trusted for so long. The fight wasn't over, but the first victory was mine. After Emma's dismissal and the board's decision, I knew the hard work wasn't over. My reputation, while no longer under attack, still needed repairing, not just with the board, but with my team and myself. The first step was addressing my team. I held a meeting to clear the air about everything that had happened. I didn't throw anyone under the bus, but I made it clear that the errors and dishonesty couldn't be ignored. I emphasized the importance of transparency and accountability moving forward. Some team members looked uncomfortable, likely wondering how much I knew about their roles in the irregularities. Others seemed relieved that I was taking charge again. By the end of the meeting, the mood had shifted. While not everyone was fully back on board, I could sense a renewed commitment from most of them. Behind the scenes, I began restructuring workflows to close the gaps that had allowed the sabotage to go unnoticed. I implemented stricter checks and balances, ensuring no single person could hide or manipulate data without it being flagged. It wasn't an overnight fix, but it was a start. I also made a point of reconnecting with key allies like Karen. She had been instrumental in helping me uncover the truth, and I wanted to ensure she knew her efforts were appreciated. Together, we brainstormed ways to foster better communication within the team and create a culture where issues could be raised without fear of backlash. Despite these efforts, I couldn't shake the lingering unease. The board's trust was still hanging by a thread. My performance improvement plan required regular updates and measurable progress, which added an extra layer of pressure. Every meeting with Mike or the board felt like walking a tightrope, but even under the weight of it all, I found a strange sense of determination. The experience with Emma had exposed vulnerabilities, not just in the company's operations, but in how I handled challenges. If I could turn this situation around, I'd come out stronger than ever. It wasn't about proving the board wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above everything that had happened. What I didn't realize was that one final twist was still coming, something that would test everything I thought I had rebuilt. Just when I thought the dust had settled, something unexpected landed in my inbox. A message from Emma. It was short and cryptic. She claimed the board wasn't as innocent in all of this as they appeared. According to her, they had more than suspicions about my leadership. She hinted that the board had intentionally orchestrated in the entire investigation, not just to monitor me, but to push me out. At first, I dismissed it as a desperate attempt to save face. Emma had been fired for misconduct, and her credibility was shot. But the more I thought about it, the more her claim gnawed at me. Why hadn't the board confronted me directly if they had concerns? Why hire someone to infiltrate my team? I decided to dig deeper. With Karen's help, we reviewed communications from the board, looking for anything that might corroborate Emma's claims. What we found wasn't definitive, but it was enough to make me pause. There were subtle inconsistencies, meeting minutes that didn't align with decisions, emails with vague references to restructuring certain roles, and an unusual focus on high-profile projects I had managed. I couldn't ignore the possibility that Emma might have been a pawn in a larger game. If the board had truly set this up to oust me, it meant my position was still in jeopardy. Fueled by equal parts anger and determination, I scheduled a meeting with Mike and 2 board members. In the meeting, I didn't accuse them outright, but I laid everything on the table: the sabotage, the investigation, and Emma's unorthodox methods. I asked them point blank if there were plans to replace me, or if they had doubts about my leadership they hadn't voiced. The room went silent for a moment. One of the board members assured me that their intention was never to push me out, only to ensure the company was operating at its highest potential. But their hesitation and carefully chosen words only deepened my suspicion. When the meeting ended, I felt both reassured and unsettled. Whether or not the board had ulterior motives, one thing was clear: I had to stay ahead of whatever came next. I began documenting everything, every decision, every project, every interaction with the board. I made sure my work was airtight and unassailable. If they were waiting for me to slip up, they wouldn't get the chance. The experience left me more cautious, but also more resilient. I had survived betrayal, sabotage, and corporate politics. No matter what came next, I was ready. For now, I'll keep my head down, do my job, and focus on what matters most, proving to myself and everyone else that I'm not going anywhere.